Hello and welcome to the Car Care Nut channel. So folks, we have a 2004 LS430. This one, although it looks a little dirty and everything, is actually a gem. These are super rare to find with low miles. They just run forever. It's very hard to find these in low miles for sale. The owner of this car just bought this car from all the way from Alabama. He is from Alabama. He had the car shipped here. He's concerned about the original timing belt. Now, in our area here in the Midwest, timing belts do last well over their time and all that. But when you have hot weather, rubber dries up, and he's super concerned about this timing belt. So in this video, we're going to tear into this engine, we're going to pull the timing belt to see how well do Toyota timing belts hold up with time, because this only has 72,000 miles, so it's not really by miles. But before we get started, if you're new to the channel, welcome. Consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some of my other videos if you are a returning subscriber. Well, thank you so much for watching another one of my videos, and without further ado, let's get to work. So the first thing is, we're going to remove some of these covers, and the first thing I noticed, this is missing the clips. And after a little bit of investigation, this car has been hit. Bumper is not original, this fender is not original, this hood is not original. This fender, however, is original. This car has been sitting for a while. We have a lot of leaves. We'll clean that up later. But let's start kind of taking things apart. As you're following this DIY, you can actually do this DIY from this video if you're watching. I'll talk about a few things as we go, the tricky stuff. This is of course not a beginner DIY job. This requires a little bit of skills. You gotta be careful. You gotta be real careful with southern cars and rubber. But I'm noticing this is not too bad. I mean, this stuff has never been off since day one. It's coming off pretty good, so maybe the timing belt will be good on this. We'll find out. Okay, I said that too soon. This PCV hose is like a rock. Yeah, folks, one thing about rusty cars, they're rusty, but things are not dry and dry rotten from the heat. This is the problem with non-rust belt cars that live in the heat. Everything is brittle and hard and very easy to break, so you gotta be really careful with the plastics here. And let's look at the air filter. Not too bad. Has a leaf, a little dirty, but not to a point where I'd replace it. Now before we continue, we're going to want to drain the coolant out of this. So let's lift up the car. Let's take the coolant cap. Of course, this car has been sitting for a while, so it's even low on coolant. Let's see what that's about. Well, before we drain the coolant, I want to show you this car because it's incredible. This is a 2004 from Alabama. Folks, look at these oil pan bolts, the transmission pan bolts. They're incredible. They still have color. This car has zero, absolute zero rust. It is missing a few covers. Looks like something hit here. I see this is bent. Fuel tank is hit, but it's not really damaged. That's really about it. But look at this diff. No rust on it, nothing. Nothing, folks. This is new cars here. Before you take delivery of them, will have something like this. That's completely normal. But this car is incredible. You look at some stuff like in the suspension. One bolt that I wanted to show you. That cam right there. I'll point it in the editing. That looks brand new. Usually this is just a glob of rust, and this one looks brand new. Look at this. Wow. Anyways, let's drain the coolant and see, because we have some oil leaks. Like I see one here. There is a few more wetnesses here and there, possibly from the valve covers. We're going to take a look as we go. here's that leak that we were looking at. See it on the hose right there? It's gonna be really hard to show you, but it's all the way up there in the valve cover. Maybe when we lower the car I'll show you, but it's leaking all the way from the top all the way to the bottom right here, and onto the cover and onto the power steering boot right here. So, but look at this again, original oil filter, that's a good sign. Nothing is rusty here. This is going to be a beautiful car to work on, honestly. What a privilege. Well, let's drain the coolant. While that drains, we're going to remove the whole radiator. So I'm going to get these transmissions lines out of the radiator here. Let's hope they don't look, actually look soft, so we might get lucky here. This is not a car that actually sat under the sun all its life. And look at that, that came right off. Usually these are completely seized. I'm gonna try to cap it. There we go. And then stick the other one out. This one comes right out. Oh wow, this came right out. This is beautiful. Trying to minimize the mess. It's gonna make a mess. There's no way around it, but minimizing it. Rag here just to catch some of these strips. Makes cleaning later easier. All right, well now we're gonna lower the car and start tearing into it. All right, let's work toward removing this radiator so we can have all the room in the world to work on this. So, in case you're following this video DIY, let's talk about a few things. If you're doing this on a truck, GX, LX470, the Sequoia, old Sequoia with the 4.7, or a Land Cruiser with the 4.7, Tundra with the 4.7, you're going to have the cooling fan that is mechanical connected right here, 4 12mm nuts. It comes out. Super simple, but otherwise, this is potentially the easiest one to do on the LS. We'll do another one on a truck step by step so you can see it, but this is the easiest one to do. You've got plenty of room, very easy, goes very quickly. The best way I describe this timing belt is like a Lego. It's a piece of Lego. If you don't take it off the right way, you're going to have problems. I'm going to start with this belt. This belt looks good. Perhaps it's a good idea to replace it. Talk to the owner. Then we're going to kind of make our way through the maze. You'll see how this maze unfolds. Well, well, well. Would you look at that original timing belt. Folks, I'm going to get you close. This is another testimony to Toyota reliability. I mean, look at this belt. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. Now, it's not a waste to replace it because you don't want to wait for these belts to actually come apart to replace them. I'll show you an example of a belt from a 2004 Sienna that we recently replaced here. Original belt, 100,000 miles. Look at this. This is what I was expecting on this, but actually it's not. But if you see this, this is dangerous. This belt is ready to snap. This was also a 2004 Sienna. Just needed a timing belt. But this one doesn't look like that. And actually is in good shape, but we're replacing it. It's overdue on time, so let's not risk it. Let's continue the job and you'll see the whole thing unfold. So this is one of the differences between an LS430 or if you're doing the 4.7 in the trucks. You gotta actually in the trucks remove the power steering pump. Just 14 millimeters, pulls out. You're not taking it all the way out, you're just pulling it back because the alternator hits it when you take it out. Again, the alternator you gotta take, this is where the Lego comes in. You got to pull the alternator out so you can get the tensioner out, because the alternator overlaps the belt tensioner, which is in the way of the timing belt. But in these, you can actually pull the alternator without pulling the power steering pump. Super simple, just 140, 112 millimeter nut. There's a ground on the 14 at the bottom on these, not on the trucks. And then you're just gonna pull your alternator, set it to the side. That's all you need. And I'll show you where it overlaps. It overlaps it right here. Anyway, remove this cover. See, this cover has a lip and it has another lip. If you don't seat these lips right, everything won't sit right. You're gonna have all kinds of problems. Now, let's pull our belt tensioner. See where it overlaps? The alternator actually sits here. So you can't pull this out with the alternator in the way. That's why you want to set it to the side. You know when it's connected and the whole mess, just take it out, put it to the side, and off she goes. Now we come to this side. This is where there are 100 ways to cross the river. And of course, this is a Southern car. All of these clips are just coming apart so you can touch them. It's all plastic, not an issue. That also came off. You have a cam position sensor here that is in your way. You don't want to be careful with these wires. They're very brittle on this. The rubber grommet right here. When you pull this cover, you gotta watch the wire of the sensor right here. You gotta put it through the cover. And these, because we have metal covers, you actually have a gasket for them. You're not replacing it, just make sure you preserve it and put it back. Now we get to the fun part. And this is the fun part in the trucks. And this, very simple. This is the fan, where the fan would sit on the trucks. This is basically an idler in this, doesn't do anything. But in order to remove this, you gotta pull the compressor, not out, just take the bolts and let it sit in the side, because the compressor actually bolts into this one. To do that for us, we're going to lift the car, take it off from the side. But if you're doing this in the ground, you've got a truck, they're a little tighter. So here's a tip for you. This is where this tool comes really in handy here, folks. This is really long. It reaches in. It's a 14 millimeter. I'll have this in my Amazon affiliate store. And actually, Snap-on invented these, and I guess the panel ran out or something. And now Gear Wrench makes them, because you can buy this whole set for the price of one from Snap-on. This is actually the Gear Wrench one. Really good, really worth it. In this case, the 14 millimeter will save you a lot of time and aggravation. It's really hard to show you on camera, but basically we're using that tool I talked to you about. Here's that bracket. Looks a little bit thicker and a little bit different on the trucks, but basically there's a stud that sits right here at the bottom, nut, bolt all the way at the back of the compressor, and then one bolt at the top. And because Toyota is very smart, when you take that bolt at the top, the compressor won't come barreling out. I'll show you why when we lower it. The reason for that is these compressors have this little clip right here that hooks it here. So now, if I unhook it, now it falls off. That's what we want. Very clever design from Toyota. Now that the compressor is out of the way, we're going to remove this thing. And off she goes. So now that we've gotten to this point, before we take our crank pulley off, we want to put things on top dead center compression. Now I'm going to show you something that is actually in the book, and it works very well. This engine is interference, and it is very, very jumpy. So if you put it at 0, as soon as you touch things, it just moves, and especially the cams. As soon as you take the belt, they'll jump and make all kinds of rattle. But if you look at the timing marks, there's a T mark. T mark right here, T mark right here, same thing. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna get things lined up to the T mark, right there. You're supposed to line this up with this, but In some of them it does, some of them it does not. So don't worry about this because you'll see how the OEM belt goes. But worry about lining up this mark with the T, with just the line of the T. Same thing on the other side. We could probably go here on this more. That is better. Right now we're lined up at the bottom of the T. I'm going to use an impact to take the crank pulley out. If you don't have an impact, you're going to want the chain wrench. Chain wrench goes around here with a big chain. You hold it and somebody cracks the nut loose. The bolt loose. These are very tight, so sometimes you have to do that even if the impact doesn't work. So let's try this one. That came right out. No rust, so we should be good. And when you look at that, that never happens, folks. By the way, it never just pulls right out. You have to fight it, put a puller, pull it. But this one came right out. So if you're in the south, this is how it's going to be. If you're in the Rust Belt, not so much. Now we're going to remove the last cover here. Once you remove the cover, pull your ring for the sensor, for the crank sensor. This is where the crank sensor reads the signal. This is actually top dead center right here, and then the rest are the location of the crank. This goes in a certain direction. If you notice, it's like K pushed out at the top. You do not want to put it backward, it'll chew up the timing belt. Put it this way. So I always set it down, so you take it out, put the cover, and we're done. Now that we're at this point, we're going to take the timing belt tensioner off. That's getting replaced. The rubber stayed in there. There we go. That's the rubber piece. Now, we can lock our belt out. And you notice the cams didn't jump. Everything stayed stationary. And life is very good right now. Because this belt it feels soft. Look, it is worn, but it's not gotten to a point starting to peel off the sides a little bit, but not to a point like the other one I showed you. This is not bad at all. It does have some fraying, but not terrible. Not bad at all, Toyota. Original belt from 2004, 72,000 miles. Not bad. And since we are here, we're going to also replace the water pump. And these idlers as well are getting replaced. Everything else you can replace outside. These, you basically have to do this whole job again. This, even on the V6, they have a washer at the back, and this washer actually seals for oil. So always put this washer when you replace this. Don't forget it. Then there is this little cover. It just seals this area up, doesn't do anything else. If you forget this, I've seen so many cars missing these because technicians forget it. They get lazy. They never take things out to put it back and it gets thrown out. This is very common, unfortunately. Now come the biggest mess you'll ever see. The water pump has 5 aluminum bolts. These bolts have to be replaced. These are the aluminum bolts. These work great for heat shields, like on a Tundra or Tacoma or 4Runner. These are great. They're just the right size. Save them for later, for rainy day if you would, but let's remove the rest. But before we do, there's a common mistake here. When you pull the water pump, it's notorious to break these wires for the cam sensor right here, because you see how they overlap? So always pull your cam sensor out. Now we got one more at the bottom, these 2 studs. And now let's bring the rain, because this is where all the coolant's gonna go. There we go. It's gonna make a mess. I do have something grabbing it at the coolant at the bottom, so we wouldn't make as big of a mess, but it's inevitable. Now this water pump is stuck on the O-ring on the pipe. It can be a little tricky to get out, but if you're patient, wiggle them back and forth. Eventually come out, just like that. Sure, your harness. This harness is very so important. We're going to talk about it in a little bit here. Here's the original water pump. Not leaking, mind you. I don't see any leaks. Nothing. We replace it just because we're already here. Now that we said it's not leaking, it's great. It's gonna start leaking, so we don't want that. So this is the kit that I'm using. It's an ASIN kit. Comes with everything. Folks, if you ever see this kit, I actually really like this kit. This is an original timing belt. This is the same manufacturer as the OEM. Exactly the same belt, same water pump, comes with the correct parts, the 5 bolts, the 2 O-rings, the gasket, water pump. It also comes with the idlers. This is the tensioner idler, the other idler, and then the tensioner itself. I recommend this kit. To me, it is the same as OEM. I compare the parts, looked at it. I like it. One thing you want to be careful of, make sure the source where you're getting these is good, because there is counterfeit of these, believe it or not. That's how the world we live in works. So these O-rings, big one goes last, small one goes first. I'll show you where the small one goes. Small one goes right here. This little pipe. There's the old one. The new one goes on. Be careful with the new one. You don't want to damage it. You want to put a little bit of lubricant or something on it. Now we're going to give everything a good clean. A little bit of coolant on the surface will not affect this gasket. We just want to make sure we don't have dirt or debris or any of that sort. And this one is not even rusty. It looks beautiful. Usually you have to grind at them and clean. This is a gift. So the gasket goes on. This only goes one way. Then the water pump. You're gonna want to make sure that you don't crimp this wire. That's the first warning, and we're going to talk about this wire a lot in this video. You must replace these bolts. This is the recommendation here. These bolts stretch and they're one-time use. Somebody will say they've reused them, they're fine, okay, but replace them. It's not worth it, not worth the risk. Now we put these back. These have a very particular location where they go. If you put them in the wrong location, they'll actually obstruct you later. So that's the one thing you want to watch out for. Now we're going to start the fast reassembly. So we're going to put our new idler, our other new idler. Now the moment of truth. We're going to install the timing belt, and the OEM timing belt, or this ASIN kit, which is also an OEM timing belt. You'll have left cam, right cam, and then if you look around, crank. These are going to go on the marks on the cam and the crank, but the arrow faces you, does not face the inside. So we're going to install the first side. We're going to put the arrow on the line. There's a little mark here. Don't follow the paint marks. Sometimes these paint marks are a little off. These are the factory marks. Like here. This mark is not really on the line because it's faded. So be careful with these. Always look at that notch here facing the T. That's good. We're going to tighten our belt and then go at the bottom. Usually, if everything did not move, and I can already tell this is going to be a tooth off, but if you can get everything to sit in at the correct spot, you'll be right on. And the way to check it is grab a mirror and you look. You want to get to a point where your dot on the crank lines up with the line. Now I see this one is one tooth off. So what we're going to do in this case is pull our belt off again, get our crank pulley, attach it, and then turn the crank by hand. This is going to take a little bit of estimation and experience, but you'll eventually get used to how much to turn it to move it one tooth. Make sure your marks are lined up again, and let's try that one more time. Now we're going to put our mirror again. That is right on. I hope I'm putting the mirror so you can see it. We'll get the camera really close here so you can see it. You see the arrow, how it lines up with that yellow mark? The mark that is yellow is actually an indentation in the crank pulley. So that's how you get this. You look at it, it's good. We're happy, life is good. Now that your timing belt is on, you have to do one more thing. You want to get the slack that is here on the tensioner side, because otherwise you could jump time. So we're gonna get our pulley again, install it, and then there you go. We got a little bit more to go. Now this is tight. You got all your slack on the tensioner side. Here's a new tensioner. Install it, and this is already compressed. If you're reusing the old tensioner, you can compress it with a vise and install a pin. You will need a pin like this or an Allen key. Pin is preferred. So now that we got our tensioner on, we're going to pull the pin. You saw the tensioner pop, so that's good. And for mechanics, you're going to save this guy for the next time. Now that we got this, there's one thing we do not want to forget that we actually talked about. This little piece of plastic. We talked about it being forgotten often. So let's install it. There we go. Now it's covered up, it's good. This wire is going to be an issue. You're going to want to make sure it does not hit this. And at the same time, it goes right here. This is the angle of it. If you go like this, it's no good. If you go like that, it's no good. It needs to go exactly like this. Otherwise, you pinch it, and there's a common problem where, because this goes to the crank sensor and the oil pressure switch. Oil pressure switch, not a problem. Crank sensor, car won't start if you pinch this wire. Having said all that, I'm going to put you on a grand time lapse as we put this whole thing back together, because we don't want to make this video too long. Right now, you've gotten really the hardest part. The rest of it is just assembling it exactly in the reverse order that you took it apart. So let's do this. There you have it, folks. This thing is almost back together. I know we're missing a few things. The drive belt is one of them. I put the old drive belt back. We're going to talk to the customer. I just need this car movable so we can move it around in the shop, but we're actually going to replace that drive belt. This is not a very difficult job if you've had some experience. On the trucks, it is a little bit more difficult. Trucks sitting higher. You got the fan, mechanical fan that you're dealing with, but take your time. The order of things that you've seen in this video, how I took them off, is exactly the same as you would when you do the V8 on the trucks. When you do this V8, all these V8s are exactly the same. Certain ones are easier. This is probably one of the easier ones. The Sequoia, GX are a little bit on the medium side. The Tundra. When you get into the Land Cruiser and the LX430, that's when things get a little bit harder. And where they get harder is with the compressor. This is the easiest one to take out. The Sequoia is not so bad, but the Land Cruiser and the LX, they can get really tight. And you have to really use some ingenuity with your extensions and how to get to the bolts and then to line them up. But you take your time with a job like this, it'll go smoothly. Make sure you take your time lining the timing belt and everything will go smooth. And if you're wondering how long does a timing belt from a Toyota last, original for all this long years, since 2004, well, you've seen it in this video. But be careful. That does not mean you should extend the time, because I've shown you two 2004 car timing belts. One of them was fine, one of them was ready to break. So don't risk it. A good interval for these timing belts is right around 90 to 100,000 miles. 10 years somewhere, try not to get it go past 10 years. That would be a good interval. And when you take your old belt out and it looks fine, don't get upset. You do not want to take a timing belt out and it looks like it's ready to snap in half. That means you went too far, you were risking it too much. You want to replace a belt that is getting old, but it's not completely worn out, with a new one to prevent issues, especially when you have an interference engine like this beautiful engine right here. Folks, I hope this video is helpful and informative. I hope you learned something new. If you like it, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some of my other videos. And until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and you have yourself a wonderful day.